A 2.5-year-old Guatemalan child has died, becoming actually the 4th known minor to die after being detained by border agents since December. Here are the details, and this is just a quote right here. First off, the death of a single child in custody of our government is a horrific tragedy, and this was said by Jess Morales Rocketto, chair of the advocacy group Families Belong Together. He goes on to say, 4 in 6 months is a clear pattern of willful, callous disregard for children's lives. Now, this little boy spent several weeks actually in the hospital and then later being diagnosed with pneumonia. US Customs and Border Protection said the boy's mother told Border Patrol agents her son was ill on April 6th, and that was 3 days after they were apprehended near an international bridge in El Paso, Texas. The Guatemalan consulate is actually waiting for an official cause of death before sending the child's body back to Guatemala. His mother is still here waiting on her immigration case to be resolved. All 4 children who have died after being apprehended by the Border Patrol were from Guatemala, which of course is ravaged by violence, poverty, and drought. More than 114,000 people from Guatemala have been apprehended by the Border Patrol between October and April. And this is important because many immigration detention facilities are overflowing and unequipped to house families with young children, especially as the numbers of families crossing the US-Mexico border surged to record highs. The Border Patrol made 99,000 apprehensions on the southern border just in April, and more than half were parents and children traveling together. Now, US Customs and Border Protection, they're actually not answering any more questions about this latest little boy's death. But we know this, in recent weeks, the Border Patrol in El Paso has detained families for hours outside in a parking lot and under an international bridge. Migrant parents have complained of having to sleep at that location on the grounds outside or in poor conditions in tents.
Okay, so first thing I look at in a situation like this is how responsive were the people in those detention centers. Mm-hmm. So in the first death that was reported, they had waited, in my opinion and the opinion of a lot of people who looked at the case, far too long before they responded. In this case, they did get the kid to the hospital on the first day that the issue was brought up. So as far as we know, this just happened, and you usually get more information as these cases develop. But in that sense, you could say, well, look, if they responded right away, I don't know how much culpability they have. But let's talk about that. Well, number one, they didn't in all 4 deaths, and so that's a significant concern. Number 2, they shouldn't be holding these people in the first place. Right. And so Trump is holding a record number of kids and families, et cetera, and that leads to more deaths when people are detained. Now, how could it make a difference? So for example, if you're with a family member and you have a court date, you have to show back up to see if you're gonna get asylum, et cetera, and you get sick, they might drive you to the hospital right away. But if you're in a detention center, you might not want to call attention to yourself. You might not know what your rights are. You might not know what the rules are, even if the detention center was acting with best intent. And as we've seen in the past, that's not necessarily the case. And now this is no longer random. That's 4 kids in a short span of time here. And so there are other things you can do, by the way. You can't just throw your hands up and go, I guess there's nothing we can do. No, we can hold less people, but beyond that, the Red Cross is ready and willing to help. They say, look, we can help make sure people are not sick, et cetera, or get treatment when they are sick. And what's the usual Republican reaction? We're number 1, we don't need any help. No, you do, 4 kids have died. You definitely need the help. So if someone's offering it, take it.
I think the real scary part about this, and I'm gonna bring this back to the Holocaust for a second. There's an ongoing debate amongst scholars about intentionalism versus functionalism, and the intentionalism argument is that there was rampant anti-Semitism from Hitler, and that the final solution was talked about ahead of time, and that was always the ultimate goal. But the functionalist approach is that originally there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and then this was there was functional utility in slowly but surely and rapidly starting to execute prisoners, right? And what I'm terrified by here is that I still believe that there was a final solution that people believed in ahead of time and were achieving that goal slowly but surely. But I'm starting to understand how people can argue from a functionalist perspective, because this is like we're so ready to deny these people of any personhood, of any agency whatsoever, exclusively because they got a terrible end of the birth lottery deal, basically. That they're trying to better their lives, they're trying to secure a better existence for their children, and they're suffering greatly for it. And in the media, we're doing everything we can in American media to vilify them exclusively because they came here as innocent citizens. And slowly but surely, the public opinion is changing as well. So I'm terrified that it starts off with a couple children, and then before you know it, hey, what are we gonna do? I mean, there's just too many people. They just keep dying. This has happened in American history before. We've had concentration camps for Latin American immigrant workers that we brought into this country in the era of World War I, World War II, and then disposed of them in a similar fashion, or used incredibly brutal tactics to fly them to different parts of Mexico to make sure that they could not come back to different places where they don't know anything about the landing area or the culture or even the language in some instances. And I feel like we are rapidly approaching that right now. And if people are fine with children dying in concentration camps that we currently have at the border, then if they're fine with 4 people, they're definitely going to be fine with 100,000 people at some point, and I'm terrified of that.
So the results of these policies are horrific anyway, and any way you slice it, and there's a range of how horrific those policies wind up becoming, and so the Holocaust is a unique situation, but we have done things in this country that unfortunately parallel some portions of at least the beginnings and the middle of those series of events. So to build on what Haas is saying, so did we have different concentration camps in America at different times? Of course we did. We interned the Japanese during World War II, but we also had these concentration camps called slave barracks. I mean, what were they? Those were not voluntary. They were put into certain quarters and forced to work, and often died in those places. Well, they all eventually did, but a lot were killed in those places on purpose, raped, etc. And let alone what Haas is referring to with the Latino situation, let alone what we did to the Native Americans, and would often hold them in camps. And then what would we say in the Native American situation? Well, I guess they got disease blankets and a lot of them wound up dying. There's nothing we could do about that.
Or that they're barbarians.
There was something we could do about it.
Or that they're barbarians, that we dehumanize them in every step of the way. And that's precisely what we're doing with the myth of the criminal immigrant, which is statistically untrue. But I mean, evidence shows that immigrants are not predisposed to crime in any meaningful way, and they commit crime at much lower rates than natural born US citizens do. They give more than they take. So on the one hand, they're claiming that they're coming here to steal our welfare, which we don't really have a great welfare state to begin with. But on the other hand, they're also stealing our jobs, and it's just warfare on every territory. That immigrants just cannot do anything right. That these migrants that are coming into this country are a scourge or an invasion, and that is deliberate. It's to justify these policies that they're pushing.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.